the most recent information I could get, which is 2012, from a book called Michigan Agricultural Statistics, published by the USDA in the Great Lakes region, you'll see that Berrien County is ranked so high in the production of all of these fruits and vegetables. Grapes is #1. You might think that Northwest Michigan with the Leelanau and Old Michigan Peninsula would be #1, but they aren't. Grapes is #1 for Berrien County. And then as we go down the list, you can see that there are vegetables, melons, potatoes, and sweet potatoes. Berrien is 2nd in Michigan. Fruit trees, tree nuts, and berries, 4th. And in 5th place, Berrien comes in with vegetables, all kinds of harvested vegetables, as well as asparagus and blueberries. Blueberries surprised me because we always hear about the west side, around Kent County and those counties bordering Lake Michigan for blueberries, but blueberries are very big in Berrien. And then, of course, growing has diversified to include nursery, greenhouse, floriculture, and sod. That's really important. And if you'll notice, colonies of bees. Fantastic. So the diversity in Berrien County is still sustained to this day and very, very productive. Next slide. I wanted to pull out and take a look at the state of Michigan's rank in US production of some of these products. So first are Niagara grapes. Michigan is first in grapes. I lived in New York State, and I would have thought it was New York State, but no, or even Washington State. #1 in grapes, #1 in asparagus, #1 in all kinds of dried beans, #1 in cucumbers, #1 in tart cherries, which we all know about, and #1 in squash, all different kinds of squash. So if Michigan is #1 in the US for grapes, and Berrien County is #1 in Michigan for grapes, then that means that Berrien County is #1 in the United States for grape production, Niagara grapes. And that's so impressive. This is a picture of the Niles Market in Artisan Alley. It was started in 2001. Please go to the nilesmichigan.org community website to check in on what their schedule will be. They're going to be having the market. It will be from sometime in May through September. They operate on Sundays, and I understand that they'll be picking that up again. But again, I'm not sure what the start date is, so I really encourage you to go to the website. You could Google Niles DDA or Niles Farmers Market and get the information that way. Taking advantage of all of one of the 6 or all of the 6 terrific farmers markets that you have. Next slide. It isn't just raw produce that happens in Berrien County. Berrien County has a number of food processing operations and, of course, farms. There are 49 wholesale food processing plants. There are 39 meat processing plants, according to the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, 24 food warehouses, and 3 controlled atmosphere storage facilities. This is, of course, reflective of the enormous volume of produce and products that you have in the county, and they need to be handled locally and processed locally. On the right side of the screen, you can see the number of farms in Berrien County. And this is taken from a 2017 study published by the Berrien County Health Department. 1,063 farms currently in that year in Berrien County. And very interestingly, 46% of the land in Berrien is still used by farms. This contrasts with the entire state of Michigan. Only 10.5% of the land in Michigan is used for farms. So it shows you Berrien County's real prominence here. There are 52,000 farms in Michigan, and as I said, 10.5% of the land is used for farms. In Berrien County, 85% of the farms are family or individually owned. It's part of the tradition of the county. And interestingly, I wanted to find out, since farming is changing so much these days, it's a very dynamic change happening. I wanted to find out about ownership of farms. So 90% of them are owned by men. 10% of farms are owned by women, and that's actually a surprisingly high percentage of women. 98% of the farms are owned by white or Caucasian farmers. 1% are owned by African Americans, and 1% are owned by Hispanic farmers. So there's a lot going on in Berrien County. It's such an impressive, agriculturally rich county for the state of Michigan, and is pulling us up, as you have seen, in all those statistics for volume production of the crops that we've mentioned. And this image here, down in the lower left-hand side, is from July of 1940. It's an image of a migrant worker in Berrien County in a cherry canning plant, and it's from the Farm Security Administration. Times have really changed, but I really love to integrate beautiful old photographs into the talk. Next slide. For a little more context, I'm going to run through some Berrien County agricultural history. In the late 1670s, early European explorers met the Potawatomi and Miami tribes. So Michigan was being explored in the 1600s, like most of the rest of the country. Berrien County was founded in 1829 and organized in 1831, even before Michigan became a state in 1837. A real early presence. By 2015, the population in the county had grown to 154,636. And I really love this quote from James Fenimore Cooper. He said that Berrien lies in a region that almost merits the lofty appellation of the Garden of America. And if you live there and you think about where Berrien came from, and the beautiful rolling hillsides and the trees and the lakes and the rivers, you can understand why he said that. He was very impressed. Like most of the rest of the country, except for early settlements on the East Coast that became the large metropolises we have today. In the 1840s and 1850s, farming was a way of life for almost everyone. People lived on family farms, early settlers. My grandparents came in the 1860s, I think, and settled in mid-Michigan. The family farm was the way of life. It was the way you started. People didn't start in cities and towns. They wanted land. They came from farming communities all over the globe, particularly from Europe. And so farming was the natural way to start. The family farm was self-sustaining, and this is a really key point as we go forward. There was no need for farm stands or farmers markets because everything that was produced on the farm was used by the family. The family farm produced just about all the foods the family would need to live. And this will change with increasing development of roads, communications, and technologies. We're going to see how the family farm has changed, and Mr. John Bergot, his example we will return to time and time again because this happened to him when he changed from being a self-sustaining family farm to growing production for the Benton Harbor fruit market and then opening his own farm stand. Next slide. So in 1850, out of the just over 108,000 people identified as gainfully employed in the entire state of Michigan, 60% were farmers. It was still the major way of life. By 1857, the Cincinnati orchard near Benton Harbor was, quote, the largest orchard in the world, with 25,000 bushels of peaches per year. Peaches were a really prominent crop in Berrien County, until disease forced the orchard to be cut down in 1877. In 1860, we'll return to this again, the Benton Harbor Fruit Market started to accommodate the increasing production of fruit products and produce. And by the 1860s, Michigan's economy was beginning to diversify even more. A small amount of manufacturing started in Michigan. We were doing cooperages, hoops for barrels, saddleries and harnesses, wagons and carts, agricultural implements, and other kinds of products. Other manufacturing in these early days in Michigan included shoes, and improvements in transportation technology allowed tropical fruits to become a profitable Latin American export for the first time again in the 1860s. This is where the world starts becoming a little more globally integrated. As we know, bananas are still the most profitable exports for other countries, and they're everywhere in grocery stores, as you see. By 1865, the Colby-Hinckley Fruit Package Mill started making baskets in St. Joseph. If you're going to have high fruit production of apples, peaches, strawberries, blueberries, back in those days, they were taken to market in baskets. Crates hadn't been devised yet, they weren't in use. So baskets were hugely important, and the wood to supply those baskets and basket makers. In 1872, progress continued with the first canning factory opened in St. Joseph. And food processing grew rapidly in the last half of the 19th century. Next slide. Things really pick up speed here by the early 19 teens. There were 91 food processing plants in Michigan, mostly concentrated in the Southwest to process products from the fruit belt. In 1933, the Herald Press reported that Berrien was first in the nation in raspberries and third in the nation for blackberries and dewberries, fourth for peaches, and ninth for pears. The long tradition of fruit production in this very rich agricultural county started early and continued and is going strong. It's an interesting fact during the Depression in terms of economics. During the Depression, cherries sold for just 2 cents a pound, if you can imagine that. And John Vergat sold Alberta peaches for 99 cents a bushel. There was a requirement that they be a 2.5-inch minimum diameter. This beautiful image on the right is from a 1925 promotional brochure about Berrien County. And at the top it says, Berrien Springs, Michigan, the hub of Berrien County. Berrien County in the St. Joseph River Valley is the leading fruit-producing center of the United States. And at the bottom it says the major part of the fruit is sold on the farm. I'm not quite sure that's true. I think it means sold from the farm. But you can see the evident, lush, verdant reflections of what James Fenimore Cooper was talking about in these photographs. The rich orchards, the grapevines, the crops, and of course the strawberries in the champagne glass is a nice touch as well. This wonderful brochure was meant to attract people from Chicago and Indiana to come specifically to Berrien County, and within Berrien County to Berrien Springs, to enjoy vacation. so that they could do what were then called farm stays, live on a farm, come from the city, take a break in the countryside, live with a farm family, walk around the property, enjoy good food, sunshine, swimming in a lake, and really get away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Like the garden that James Fenimore Cooper was talking about, it was easily accessible for people who had the means from Chicago or Indiana to come and visit Berrien Springs and enjoy everything that it has to offer. Next slide. Of course, as with everything else, farming operations became increasingly mechanized. In the 1920s, tractors became more common. The tractor replaced the horse as a source of power on the farm, and that meant that more acreage became available for the production of food and fiber. This marks the beginning of the nation's farm surplus issue. John Bergot said that his family got their first tractor in the 1936-37 time period. He said it would overheat and they had to wait for it to cool off before starting it up again. An early tractor. One of the most important developments for the entire country was the 1933 Federal Road Aid Act. And I'm mentioning this because it has real implications for not only getting produce to market, but bringing tourism into the county as well. The act provided federal funds to state highway departments to improve rural post roads. Previously to this, any road that was built or grazed was done so by the county, perhaps with some help from the state. But states didn't have a lot of money to work with, and counties didn't either. So when the Federal Road Aid Act of 1933 came into place, there was an enormous influx of funding available to states so that they could pave roads, develop interstate transportation, make things easier for people, and enhance transportation all around. And of course, as you can imagine, rural life was transformed. The automobile, truck, and tractor made it possible for farmers to get their products to market faster. By 1920, 40% of Michigan farmers had cars. And by 1930, 20% owned trucks. So you see that Mr. Bergot was right in the middle of that development. Trucks and automobiles on the improved roads caused commercial and tourist trade to soar. Tourists increasingly flocked to Berrien County. And another interesting development was that by 1948, 96.6% of Michigan farms had electricity compared to just 8% in 1920. So if you can imagine the changes that we've seen in our lives in the 1990s, for example, with the tech boom and the explosion of the internet and technology, if you can imagine, this is the same kind of revolutionary time period that happened from like 1910 to the 1930s and 40s. Rural electrification was so important for farm families. Roads, the development of modern technology for farming equipment and delivery of products to markets revolutionized farming. Electricity, for example, is a great servant that not only lighted the house and barns, but also operated radio and television sets, the cream separator for dairy owners, a vacuum sweeper, poultry incubators, and innumerable other devices. Taking a little bit more of the risk out of farming, making farming more productive for farmers, and hopefully the lives of farm families a little bit easier. The truck that I'm showing here is a 1920 Rio truck. The REO, or Rio Motor Car Company, was based in Lansing, Michigan, my hometown, and it produced cars and trucks from 1905 to 1975. It was founded by Ransom E. Olds, who previously to the Rio Company established Oldsmobile. And it's a beautiful old if you can picture this open back truck filled with bushel baskets going to the market. Next slide. So to summarize, before we move on, the impact of increased specialization and mechanization in the 20th century on farming and farm families was huge. The produce industry changed dramatically, as did life on the farm. Farmers became producers more comparable to manufacturers than farmers a century ago. Farm production increased. Farmers were no longer producing on the farm as much as possible of what their families needed for food and clothing. Farmers concentrated more on one specialized crop or product, which we now call monocropping. And farm families began buying food and supplies from stores and markets, just like city people. General farming, with an emphasis on maximum production of products for home consumption, has now almost disappeared. And in his interview, Mr. Vergat, the farmer, said that family or small farming is harder today than it was in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. First, because everything costs more, including fertilizer. And second, finding help is difficult. Unless you're farming large amounts of crops and can provide employment over a longer time, you can't find help, he said. Today, labor on his farm is part-time or family. And pay last summer was about $10 an hour or $100 a day for a 10-hour workday. One of the expenses Mr. Vergat talked about was chemicals. One chemical that he uses on crops costs $400 for 20 ounces, or 1 ounce per acre. He said while it's effective, some crops require other expensive treatments, such as fungicides, which adds to the cost. Finally, a really interesting expense is water. He said that his farm began irrigation in 1951 with strawberries. Today, they irrigate all their vegetables, which increases the demand for water supply at his place and the expense. And in particular, sweet corn requires a lot of water. So you can see how perhaps very challenging small farming is these days, and how farms become more consolidated and are growing fewer crops in order to make it ends meet. Next slide. So we've talked about framing this situation in the Berrien County fruit and produce production. We've talked about some Berrien County history and the development of farming and how it changed so radically over the 100 years from the 1860s to the 1960s and continuing today. I want to shift now and talk a little bit about markets. So we talked about the products, and now we're going to talk about how they get to consumers. Markets are ancient, and there is a universal market experience. Marketing is one of the oldest urban functions, and that's a key too. The heart of many early cities was the marketplace, the Greek agora, the Roman forum, and more recently, the commons of England and New England. For example, the courthouse square and other locations like a central park or a library of American towns and cities have been the places where goods and other products grown in the surrounding agricultural lands are exchanged with consumers. Even today, in many rural areas, the county seat is the scene of great activity on market day. Usually that's a Saturday, when the farmers come to town to sell their produce. And in fact, in Berrien County, the county seat, St. Joseph, has the largest farmers market of the 6 in the county. And it's on a Saturday. And they have an amazing location at Lake Bluff Park, which is really pleasant to visit and very near, just a couple of streets over from the main streets in town and near the library. So it's a really popular place to go. The market experience is universal, is ancient, is one of the oldest forms of human interaction and human commerce. And there are a couple of different venues that we're going to talk about. Public markets are markets that are usually municipally owned and operated in a building, in which vendors sell produce, fresh foods, prepared foods from open stalls, and these are permanent stalls. Public markets can, in these days, public markets have changed a lot, and public markets these days can include restaurants, bars, and a variety of shops, crafts, and even flea markets. I'm talking about public markets, and we'll get to a couple of examples in just a few seconds. But I wanted to mention public markets because when we travel, when we're able to travel again and we go to big cities like Philadelphia, has the Reading Terminal Market right in the heart of downtown, and it's a public market. Cleveland has one of my favorite markets in a neighborhood called Ohio City. It's called the West Side Market. And it's a permanent building owned by the city. There are permanent stalls. Vendors bring fresh produce, but there are also butcher shops, flower shops, and prepared food shops, a cheese shop. And it's a real valuable alternative as a way to buy directly from a producer rather than going through a middleman like a grocery store. And as we close in the talk in a few minutes, we're going to talk about the difference between buying local and buying with middlemen. In Europe, public markets are still enormous. Was in Barcelona recently and last year, and there's several fabulous markets that are really big, that have restaurants, cafes, shops, multiple butcher shops, some butchers specializing just in chicken, some specializing just in beef, prepared food products, spices, herbs, seafood. And it's a fantastic environment if you love food and really want to get to know a place. It's a public market. I would seek it out. It's a fantastic experience, lots of hustle and bustle and excitement, great food smells and sounds and sights. A fruit or produce market or exchange is a wholesale market where farmers bring crops to sell to dealers at wholesale prices. They are the chief supplier to independent grocers, and they've evolved into the city terminal wholesale market, which is like Detroit Eastern Market that we'll talk about. A produce market or exchange is like the Benton Harbor fruit market. A farm stand is an open-air business venue that sells seasonal fruit and vegetable products, other fruit products, from a farmer or local growers. And these are what we're going to see examples of, some beautiful photographs of farm stands on the roadsides from Berrien County. A farmer's market is a physical retail marketplace intended to sell foods directly by farmers and other vendors to consumers. We'll talk about the Michigan Farmers Market Association and the advocacy that we do. Farmers markets, as I mentioned, you have 6 in the county, and if you visit them, you'll see that they all have common elements, and yet they're all very individual to the community, and that's part of the pleasure of a market. Next slide. So farmers markets are really old, but we know that markets in city centers and urban centers are part of an ancient tradition, so that's not surprising. The first market in the United States, farmers market, opened in Boston in 1634, but there were other early markets. Boston was 1634, and you won't be surprised that these are on the East Coast where the early cities evolved. Hartford, Connecticut opened their market in 1643, New York City in 1686, and Philadelphia in 1693. This is a beautiful old picture of the Soulard Farmers Market in St. Louis, Missouri. Farmers markets evolve. So in 1799, farmers brought their trucks and wagons and horse-pulled carts to a flat meadow to sell fruit, dairy, vegetables, and livestock in the open air. Not a lot of food safety practices going on. In 1841, 2 city blocks were set aside because it was clearly evident that this is something that every city needs and was wildly popular. This market is operating today. It's open Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday with both indoor and outdoor vendors. And I also want to mention that the oldest continuously operating public market in the United States is the French market in New Orleans. It was established in 1794 and it's still going strong. As I said, farmers markets change over time. They often start like the Soulard Farmers Market in St. Louis with an open air market, trucks or tents. Lately, farmers markets are moving to awnings or pavilions, and then sometimes a building if there is money to build one. Markets are so valuable to not only the farmers but consumers. They primarily sell food. They're made up of small independent businesses. The farmers and vendors who go to a farmer's market are businesses, small businesses, and that's one of the reasons that farmers markets advocates like me love markets, because it makes possible someone to start a business, a food business, a small grower, prepared food business with a lower initial investment, and a lower threshold. There's just a fee to go to the market, and then you can have direct retail experience. In fact, what I like to think of farmers markets, modern day farmers markets, as is a retail pop-up that happens once a week that the community can gather around, that makes it possible for someone to try out an idea for a business. Next slide. So here's Detroit Eastern Market. It started with a farm. Here's another example of the evolution. It started with a farmer's market in the 1840s downtown in Cadillac Square. The first market sheds started to appear in 1881 on the current site of the market, which is bounded by right on Gratiot Avenue. The city of Detroit enlarged the market in 1921 to accommodate the volume of business. And this is a real success story. The market is now open for retail and wholesale over a 43-acre, what's called a market district. I mentioned city terminal wholesale produce markets. Detroit is one of those. They serve primarily as points for final distribution of goods to retailers in the city and surrounding areas. Produce for the Detroit Eastern Market wholesale market comes from a kidney-shaped food shed, which is a geographical area between where food is produced and where that food is consumed. A kidney-shaped area that stretches from southwest Ontario through the thumb of Michigan and around to Berrien County and northern Indiana and northern Ohio. So food producers and farmers bring produce from that entire area to Detroit Eastern Market. The food shed concept is similar to a watershed. Both encompass the flow of a substance from its origin to its ultimate destination. And Detroit Eastern Market, as I mentioned, has a 43-acre district, which is attracting people to live near it. Businesses spring up around it. There are many meat processing plants around it, and wine stores, restaurants. So it's a very, very lively environment and a real attraction for the city. Next slide. So when you're traveling around and you have a chance to go to a public market, you can think of public markets as a civic resource. The renaissance of public markets, and they are making a comeback, means that they are competing in a contemporary retailing environment while retaining their essential authentic elements. The authentic elements, that is the through line from the Greek agora to the public markets of today, of buying and selling. Public markets are also seen by municipalities, by both the private and public sector, as an effective strategy for revitalizing urban neighborhoods. That's what's happening at Detroit Eastern Market. Public and private sectors are looking for economic development strategies. Public markets are diverse. They come in many shapes and settings. And these are some of the benefits of public markets. As I mentioned, they renew downtowns and neighborhoods. They bring diverse people together. One of the really most wonderful things about a market is that everyone is welcome. Market managers work very hard to make sure that there are products for everyone, that there's signage for everyone, that food assistance is available for those who need it, and that there's a welcoming atmosphere with programming, which will be under a little bit of a hold this year, but programming that includes musicians and children's activities, for example. Creates an active public space. As I mentioned, markets can happen just about anywhere, but it really animates a public space like a park. They link rural and urban economies. When farmers bring their produce or products, value-added products, jams and jellies and breads to a market, you're linking rural with urban. Most of the shoppers are urban, some will be suburban. And it makes it possible for people to connect with the grower and buy from the grower or producer directly. We promote public health. It's one of the things we're doing. We're advocating everyone to eat fresh, healthy, local food, which is good for all of us. Provides economic opportunity for the farmers, growers, and other vendors. And it's a win-win all the way around. The benefits of public markets, and this would go for farmers markets as well, are strong. And that's why I think one of the reasons they've become so popular, because these are very integrated benefits. Next slide. We had a definition, a very simple definition of a farmer's market. And I want to just go into one that's a little bit more involved that my organization, the Farmers Market Association, uses. A farmers market, a public and recurring assembly of farmers or their representatives selling direct to consumer food and products, which they have produced themselves. Every farmers market makes its own decisions, but we really discourage reselling because we want the direct marketing to be successful from the farmer to the consumer. In addition, the market may include a variety of vendors determined by market management, and farmers markets are organized for the purpose of facilitating personal connections that create mutual benefits for local farmers, vendors, shoppers, and communities. And this is a photograph from the Benton Harbor Farmers Market, which is started in 2010. I spoke to their manager, and they will be open Wednesdays as usual in 2020, starting July 1st through September 2nd. It's a shortened season, but it will be at its traditional location at Dwight P. Mitchell City Center Park. And please go to the website, the Facebook page that's listed here, to check on who's vending, any special events that are going on so that you can support the market. Next slide. So like everything else, like farming, like public markets, farmers markets have changed over time. And they have exploded in the United States. The USDA census of US markets, and it's their job, the Department of Agriculture, in 1948, there were only 6, and they were all in California. In 1970, there were just 340 nationwide. But by 2020, I checked today, there were 8,600 farmers markets across the country with a total annual sales over 1 billion, aggregated from all those markets, all those little vendors, all those small businesses, over $1 billion, which is a huge impact mostly for the farmers, small businesses, and vendors. Turning to Michigan, in 2001, there were 90 farmers markets in Michigan. By 2006, there were 147 in just 5 years, what a dramatic increase. And by 2018, there were over 300. And in 2019, just over 300 as well. So we're holding strong with that. This is an image from the Village of Three Oaks Farmers Market. I checked with them, and they will be open Saturdays this year, starting at the end of this month on May 23rd. They meet at Oak Street in front of the elementary school, Saturdays from 9 to 2, and they also have a Facebook page. Starting in 2006 and still going. For a smaller community, this is a real achievement, and it's fantastic that they can keep going. Next slide. Here in the 20th century, we're going to see farmers markets change and adapt. The increase in farmers markets in the first half of the 20th century is due to the demands of an increasingly urbanized population. Consumer interest in healthy foods was one of the drivers. Another driver was concerns about food freshness, purity, and safety. If you're buying squash, lettuce, tomatoes, strawberries from a farmer, and you can talk to the farmer about how he or she grew that produce, then you can be assured about the food freshness, purity, and safety. You know that that food didn't travel 2,000 miles. You know that it came from probably within 50 or 100 miles of the farmer's market that you're visiting. And you can be assured and ask the farmer the questions about their growing practices. Another driver is, as I said, the desire to understand production practices. Foods don't have to be grown organically. Many farmers are using organic practices without becoming certified organic farmers, because the paperwork involved in being a certified organic farmer is not something, is heavy and not something that they want to have to do while using good growing practices. And of course, a sense of community and support for local farmers. We know that the average age of a farmer is increasing, and that small farmers are retiring. And there are organizations in the state of Michigan that are trying to find ways to replace the farmers and have those farms stay in business rather than being sold to development. The Michigan State University has a student organic farm program where they turn out lots of fantastically educated, smart, energetic young people who are willing to go into farming. And here is an image of the oldest farmers market in Berrien County, the St. Joe Farmers Market, started in 1985. They will be open as usual Saturdays this year, from May 23rd all the way to October 10th from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the park. Next slide. I want to mention that there are very few photographs of old farmers markets, which is why you didn't see them. There are great photographs and images that we can get from the farmers markets in Berrien County and around the state. But as you'll see with farm stands, it's coming up next. It's very difficult to document farmers markets. As I said, they're pop-up. They're up. The tents are up for 4 hours once a week, so it's not easy to get archival photographs or historical photographs of those markets. But we do have fantastic documentation of the Benton Harbor Fruit Market. We've talked about it a little bit, and we'll explore it a little bit more now. Farmers brought goods here to ship out by steamboat or later railroads to Chicago, Milwaukee, for processing. It started in 1860 near a canal, which aided commercial transportation at the time. By 1931, it was one of 4 publicly owned wholesale markets, and it grew to be, as we know, the largest non-citrus fruit market in the entire United States. This is a beautiful old photograph of open carts going to market, farmers bringing their produce to market in the early 1900s. Next slide. So the photograph you just saw was where the market was located on Elm and 8th Streets. It started in 1860. It was just 2 blocks on 6th Street. By 1926, the need for a new location due to increased traffic on the roads. And by 1929, 4.5 acres on West Britain Avenue and 9th Street were set aside. And at that time, the streets were paved and they were 80 feet wide to hold the heavy truck traffic. So 1929, and then expanded later, probably with the assistance of the Federal Road Aid Act, in order to make it possible for the enormous volume of produce going in and being sold at this market. In 1933, 5 more acres were added and 126 more stalls. And in 1967, the market moved to the current Territorial Road location. This is a great photograph of the fruit buyers. The men are posed at the old Benton Harbor Library in 1903. And as was customary in the day, every gentleman was dressed in a suit, tie, and wore a hat. Next slide. The image on the right is of a fold-out postcard of the Territorial Road site, which is still operating, a couple of aerial views. By 1960, 200 to 400 trucks would wait in line for the market to open, and the turnaround time was intense. You had to get in, you had to get out. John Vergat told us that at first, grocery store chains like Piggly Wiggly, Nash, and Kroger would send buyers to the market. The buyers that you saw sitting on the steps of the library. As time went on, the store's buyers were replaced by brokers who would buy produce for several large supermarket chains all at once, bundling them. This reduced the competition and the prices for produce. He described the brokers. They bought produce from sellers who would bring produce from the south before crops ripened. For example, tomatoes from Arkansas were brought north and sold to many grocers. Supermarkets were also able to buy the same produce and sell it cheaper than Mr. Vergat or other stands could sell it. Also, this provided produce that was out of season in Michigan. We all know we can buy something that looks like a tomato, doesn't really have much flavor, but it is a tomato, and you can buy those in grocery stores, and they're not grown in Michigan unless there's a farmer using a hoop house. Tomatoes, for example, came in all at the same time from Arkansas, the East Coast, and Tennessee. And Mr. Vergat also noted that buyers came from all over as far away as Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Ohio. And in fact, there was at least a minimal exchange, because some buyers would bring items such as watermelon to buy Southwest Michigan produce to take home. So the Benton Harbor Fruit Market, with its long, storied, and important history, now primarily serves 3 different market segments. Local growers marketing their own fresh fruits and vegetables directly to the buyers or brokers. Wholesalers offering a wide variety of product from local, regional, and national suppliers. And local produce brokers who consolidate premium quality produce not available locally. So the nature of buying and selling has really changed. The nature of farming has changed. The nature of buying has changed, and the nature of shopping has changed for consumers. As you see, the Benton Harbor Fruit Market card there says thousands of acres blossoms into food and commerce. They also give an approximate schedule for ripened Michigan fruit, because fruit in season still matters and tastes best. Strawberries starting in June, dewberries July through August, and all these other wonderful products, gooseberries, black raspberries, pears, grapes, and plums. Mr. Vergat also talked about the Lincoln Farmers Exchange, which was the same kind of operation in Stevensville. The Lincoln Exchange also had such items as coal, fertilizer, and hay. Diversification was important. Next slide. This is a fun slide. When the Berrien Benton Harbor Fruit Market was so important, and as I mentioned, derivative industries sprung up to support it. One of them was transportation. There was a company called Fruit Belt Motor Service. It was one of the largest trucking firms in Southwest Michigan, and this is a photograph of men that were called Fruit Belt Motors, who drove trucks. The Fruit Belt Motor Company expanded their service from hauling fruit to Chicago to including general merchandise from Chicago back to Southwest Michigan, and then expanded to Minneapolis and St. Paul. So a company that started very small, supporting the purchase of fresh fruits and vegetables, produce, and hauling it by truck from Benton Harbor to Chicago, for example. They then figured out that there might be products in Chicago that need to come back to Southwest Michigan. So they picked, to make the best use of the truck and not come back empty, they would put supplies and merchandise on the back of the truck and bring it to Southwest Michigan. And then they expanded from there to Minneapolis and St. Paul. This company also operated the Fruit Belt Garage and the Fruit Belt Towing Service. Made an entire business out of something that started very, very small. And I want to mention that you have such great historical museums and societies in the county. At the North Berrien Historical Museum in Coloma, there's an entire room dedicated to the Fruit Belt. And I would encourage you to visit it as well. It's called the Crate Basket and Veneer Machinery Collection. It's a big room with oversized photographs so that you can really see, like in this photograph of the Fruit Belt Motors, how this industry grew up and how it expanded and the impact of technology. It's a permanent display. So by 1911, a company called St. Joe Iron Works printed a catalog of the 41 different machines that it manufactured, including the veneer lathe. There was a veneer lathe that came in 14 different sizes, the largest weighing 28,000 pounds, and it could spin a log 5 feet in diameter. In order to make those crates and baskets, you need a lot of wood. Another company called Saranac Machine Company was a high-class stapling machinery making firm. And there are, in the exhibit, there are these machines. So you can take a look at the lathes and the staplers and the basket making machinery and the crate making machines, and really learn about how the Benton Harbor Fruit Market and fruit production in Berrien County was supported by a number of diversified companies. Okay, next slide. We're going to close now with a look at farm stands, charming as they are. This one is a Berrien County farm stand. We don't know where it was, but it was and we don't know exactly when it was taken, sometime between 1920 and 1930, very typical of the time. A farmer builds a very simple shelf or display on which products can be shown. And you pull up on the side of the road and take a look at them and buy directly from the farmer. A lot of the time these days, you might even see the honor system where there's a bucket or a jar to put the money in. But as I said, farm stands are difficult to document and research. Very few photographs are available in libraries and historical societies. And also many of them operated for a few years and then ceased operation. Earlier we talked about how rural life was transformed by the 1933 Federal Road Aid Act. When you think about it, if you're going to attract tourism to the county, and if people are not riding the train, which doesn't give them access to post roads or paved roads at all, they're coming in by train and stopping in a city center. Once roads were developed, then farm stands began to spring up because people were traveling by motor car and automobile, and they could stop on their way to the resorts to pick up, or their summer cottage, to pick up foodstuffs from a farm stand. And also, I want to say that this coincides with the change in farming practices and how farmers grow and what they grow. When the family farm stopped being the sole provider and the sole source of foodstuffs for the family, and started changing to single crops or fewer crops, then it made it possible for a farmer, desirable, to put a farm stand at the side of the road. So the things that were happening in parallel with each other were that roads were being developed and more tourists were coming into the county, and farming was changing so that farmers, if they wanted to, could put a farm stand out at the side of the road for excess or to promote their farm. So this gave a feeling of pastoral rural life and experience of accessing fresh, healthy local food for people from Chicago and Indiana driving through the country. For the purpose of farm stays that we talked about, kind of like Airbnbs now, paved roads increased tourism and farm stands started appearing on the roadsides. Farmers could earn extra money and add to the charm of the rural experience. Next slide. Now this is Miller's Fruit Stand, and this is documented. In 1980, the Michigan State Atlas for Berrien County listed 43 farm markets and U-picks. This is a different kind of change. In 2006, the Berrien County profile listed 19 farm markets and U-picks. So farm markets being markets that grew from being a farm stand and are owned by a sole farmer, not the same as a farmer's market, which is a gathering place for multiple farmers, but farm markets and U-picks. John Bergott said that for decades, what he called resorters stopped at his stand on their way to and from their weekend homes. These customers expected high quality, but had less concern for the price of the produce. After church on Sunday was traditionally a busy time for the stand. And this is Miller's Fruit Stand. You can see here that what likely started as a farm stand like the one we just saw, with just an open bench, became a small building, which was easier to see from the road and probably easier to manage. Next slide. So we can take a look at the next slide at a very successful commercial operation, which is still ongoing and very popular. Nye's Apple Barn and Farms, family owned since the late 1980s. The farm originally grew apples, peaches, grapes, sweet and sour cherries, plums, corn, wheat, oats, and hay. They opened this market in 1968, and those of you who live in the county have no doubt seen it grow and change over that time. The farm still sells apples sold to packing houses and packaged for sale at grocery stores or sold to make juice. And you can find out about Nye's Apple Barn and Farms. They're on Niles Road in St. Joseph. They have a Facebook and a website. Next slide. I want to give recognition to Michigan State University Extension Service. MSU Extension has been supporting farmers, large and small, for decades. In 1914, a federal act created the Extension Service at USDA, and MSC, Michigan State College, as it was known at the time, partnered with the Farm Bureau and the Grange. And what they did, and what you're looking at, is an architectural drawing of a movable roadside stand. Extension hired architects to design roadside stands, among many other things, and made them available to farmers so that farmers didn't have to reinvent the wheel or figure out how to make a charming farm stand. They could procure these images, and these were I found at the Michigan State University archives, and it was so exciting. This architectural drawing is from the 1950s. Extension has touched the lives of millions of people across the state with enhanced information and education about agricultural economics, horticulture, poultry and dairy husbandry, insect control, soil and water conservation, farm gain, farm forestry, land use planning, poultry pathology, soils, etc. It's one of the very most important resources for farmers. And this is just an example of how they were helping farmers many, many years ago to diversify their own income streams with this terrific roadside stand, a movable roadside stand. Next slide. I'm going to close, as I said, with just a little bit of information about food access. Why food access? What is it? The Farmers Market Association and farmers market managers traditionally are, as we said, strong believers in not only small businesses supporting farmers and other vendors, making a wonderful community gathering space, enlivening a city center or a parking lot, but also getting fresh, healthy local food into consumers. Food access is defined as the proximity to a store, financial means, acceptability of healthy foods, and the culinary knowledge to prepare, cook, and store healthy food. Proximity is the distance to a store that sells food. Financial means you can afford to purchase healthy food. And acceptability is the willingness to eat healthy foods based on taste and appearance, and the culinary knowledge, the skills to know how to prepare and cook food, raw food. Why is this important? Because markets are interested in community health. People with lower incomes and lower educational attainment are eating the fewest servings of fruits and vegetables and are more likely to be impacted by adverse health outcomes. The Berrien County Health Department report from 2017 found that 32.4% of people surveyed eat vegetables less than 1 time per day, fresh vegetables. And in the county, of the county population of just over 154,000, over 38,000 people have low access to stores for food. Low access, so they don't live near a store or they don't have transportation. And of those, 13,000 people have both low income and low access to stores that sell healthy, fresh food. And we're not even talking about local food now, we're just talking about fresh food, the produce aisle in the grocery store. So this is an issue that farmers markets are really driving. And I want to spotlight the Buchanan Farmers Market here. This is an image for them. They will be open Saturdays this year from May 16th, this Saturday, through October 10th. Saturdays from 8 to 1 on Days Avenue, and BuchananFarmersMarket.com will get you the information you need. Next slide. So what do we do about food access? For people who are qualified, we can use SNAP and a program called Double Up Food Bucks at farmers markets. SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program that makes food assistance dollars available to families who qualify. And in 2017, over $619,000 worth of SNAP benefits were redeemed at farmers markets only in Michigan. Of course, you can use your bridge card and SNAP benefits at grocery stores, but we are really trying to drive consumers to using SNAP benefits at farmers markets so that they can have the same experience and get just the same fresh, healthy local food as other folks. So Michigan fruit, Michigan-grown fruits and vegetables are further assisted by a program called Double Up Food Bucks. And this is a program that has gone nationwide, endorsed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, started in Ann Arbor by the Fair Food Network. And it's an enhancement on a bridge card, so that with your bridge card, you can get $20 worth of fruits, Michigan-grown fruits and vegetables per visit to a market per week. So what we feel this does is brings people into the farmer's market, because Double Up can be used at a market. And if a family is evaluating what they can buy and how much they can buy on a bridge card, and they know that they can buy bread and jam and milk and all those other things, meat, they may put a lower priority to fresh produce. So when we say that with Double Up Food Bucks, you can buy $20 of Michigan-grown fresh produce only, not jam, not bread, not eggs, produce plus vegetable plants like tomato plants, that means that you have $20 available just for produce. And that is really incentivizing buyers to buy produce. Eating well is fundamental to good health and well-being. Healthy eating helps us to maintain a healthy weight and reduces our risk of such diet-related illnesses as type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and the risk of developing cardiovascular disease and some cancers. So this is why when you go to a farmer's market, sometimes you'll see people using their bridge card, and you don't know whether they're using Double Up Food Bucks because it's invisible to the rest of us, as it should be. But it's an important program that has been, as I said, rolled out nationwide, that really helps families eat better. Next slide. Finally, I'm just going to briefly talk about the question, why buy local food? I'm sure by now it's well understood, but under economic impact on the center left side of the screen, you'll see economic impact and two apples. And one apple is on the left for out-of-state produce, and the other apple is on the right for produce from Michigan. And the differences between these products. The first difference is between when the fruit is picked. If it's out of state, it's picked early, it's underripe, and it ripens on the truck. If it's picked in Michigan and sent to a farmer's market, it's picked at its peak. How many miles does that produce travel? If you're buying out of state produce, it can travel 2,000 or more miles, and we know those bananas come from South America. If you're buying local food, it's usually coming less than 150 miles, sometimes as close to a farmer's market as like 30 miles. Very, very importantly, who do the dollars go to when you buy that produce? If you're buying out-of-state produce, it goes to the broker, the packing house, and distribution. If you're buying local, it goes to the local farmer. And of course, the consequence is that what the farmer gets from that sale to an out-of-state buyer or broker is that the farmer gets a few bucks. But if you're buying local, then the farmer gets much, much more and is better supported and has a better livelihood and is able to manage their business. As we said, farmers need multiple markets to be sustainable. Direct sales to farmers markets, or what are called CSA shares, community supported agriculture, where you go out to the farm and pick up your share box and they pack it for you with all kinds of great stuff, is really a good way to go. It reduces travel, it helps the environment, and it's healthier for us. Next slide. This is just a quick notice for you guys about the fact that there is something called the Michigan Farmers Market Association, established in 2006. We promote local food consumption. We connect farmers to consumers through farmers markets. We do a lot of advocacy. Very, very recently, with the occurrence of the coronavirus that hit the United States and Michigan, there was a question about whether farmers markets could be open and could sell this year. So the Market Association's executive director and staff pivoted immediately and began talking to the governor's office, the Michigan Department of Rural Development and Agriculture, and farmers markets were deemed an essential service so that we could be open. And what we're finding is that with grocery store shelves sometimes suffering from lack of product, that more and more people all over the state are turning to farmers markets, turning directly to farmers to see if they can buy a CSA share. And this is really exciting because it means it's good news for farmers because they'll be able to sell, but it's really good news for consumers because we think that it will increase visibility of local food and hopefully change some buying habits so that folks are buying from farmers markets and farmers directly. Next slide. So we advance farmers markets to create a thriving marketplace for local food and farm products. We have a number of programs. I mentioned advocacy. We have Hoop Houses for Health is a great program where farmers participate. They get support for building a hoop house, and then they pay back the cost of the hoop house gradually from sales of the products they grow there. Farmers Market at the Capitol is a great program that we hope we'll be able to have this summer. I mentioned that, you know, from ancient times, markets exist in the center of a city, and that's what the Farmers Market at the Capitol is. It's a reflection of that. It takes place on the Capitol lawn, right in front of Capitol Street at the T intersection of Capitol and Michigan Avenue, and it'll be 3 occasions this summer. And in order to raise the professional development of farmers market managers, we have a market manager certification program. We've graduated, I think, over 150 farmers market managers. And this is a picture of the class of 2020 that graduated earlier this year. Finally, in the last slide, I just want to say thank you to Rhiannon, the History Center at Courthouse Square in Berrien Springs, and all of the other fantastic libraries and historical societies and museums that helped to support my research. If there are any questions, please let me know, and I'll be happy to talk about them. Thanks for coming tonight.
All right, well, thank you, Laura. So I took us out of the screen share so that you guys can write your questions in the group chat if you had any, making it a little bit easier for everybody. So if you do have them, please include them in the group chat. But this was exciting. I think one of the things that we were fully aware of locally is we have all these farms, we drive past them all the time, we see the roadside stands, but we don't really think about how they're an indelible part of our heritage here in Berrien County. And so it's nice to kind of talk about, especially with Stowe, you know, I was telling Laura before we let everybody in that, you know, Stover's is open now and there's already roadside stands already starting up. So we're already starting to see it being brought into it and talked about. So for sure, it's an exciting time to be talking about this and knowing that these farmers markets are still going to be working and still serving people even with limited operations is still good because it means that our local economy will still benefit from it.
That's right. And St. Joe, for example, is talking about spacing people out. I think I don't know if they'll be requiring masks, but we'll want to be very conscious of spacing, physical distancing. I don't like to call it social distancing, but just physical distancing from each other. You probably will not be invited to handle all the produce. You might end up pointing to things and having the farmers select for you and bag it for you. Many other farmers markets, and I mentioned New Buffalo, many other farmers markets in my area in Washtenaw County are going online, and they're having a tremendous amount of success with that. People are loving being able to order online from farmers that they're already familiar with from visiting the farmers market, so they can be assured of quality. These days, everyone is accustomed to shopping online, so there's really no resistance to that at all. And then we have a no-touch pickup. For example, at the Ypsilanti Farmers Market, which I used to manage and I still volunteer, drivers pull up in the car. I'm wearing my mask. I ask them what their last name is. I direct them to park in a particular spot, and then I walkie-talkie the customer's name to the farmers market manager, and they, with gloves and masks, will bring the order out. The customer has already opened their side door or their trunk, put the groceries in, the produce, the meats, the prepared foods, everything, and the customer shuts the car door and goes away. So it's very easy, and lots of markets are doing this. It's also beneficial to the farmer and the vendors because farmers are very busy. They have a lot of work to do, and finding a way to carve out time to sit at a farmer's market for an entire afternoon. Many farmers go to not just one or two, 3 or 4 markets in order to sell. This is so easy for them. They know they're guaranteed sales. They know they made $20,000 that day, or they made $6,000, or they made $450. And they don't need to invest their time. They can bring it to the market, drop it off, and the market managers package every order and consolidate them. So it's working great.
So I'm assuming then the farmers market you're talking about has already started their season.
We have. The Growing Hope Farmers Market in downtown Ypsilanti starts the first Tuesday of May every year, and it was decided not to postpone it, but to really jump on this. As I mentioned, the Farmers Market Association was working on this in late January and February, working with the governor's office and the agriculture department, and pulled guidelines together and issued them to all the farmers markets in the state so that we could understand how we had to operate in this new environment. So they were ready.
Fantastic. So does anybody have any questions? I don't see anything in the group chat. I can unmute people. There's only 5 of us. I've had literally like meetings with like 15 people in there, so this is not a big deal.
Shoulders. What?
So oh, sorry, Isabel, unmute.
Breaking coronavirus updates on the WS News
Okay.
app.
Well, someone's TV's on in the background, and Isabel, I can't seem to get you to be unmuted. I don't know if that's on your end that you're muting stuff. Yes. Mute all. Unmute all. Okay. I'm not sure why Isabel's not doing it, but if you got a question, please put it in there. But if there are no questions, I'll go ahead and just close out if you guys are okay with that. I don't see any. It's a little awkward. We're all learning this together. So, okay. Well, Laura, thank you so much for coming out. We are so glad that you've been a part of this. And I do wish that we had been able to have you come out. We could have had some great local produce for our refreshments, but for the most part, thank you so much. And thank you guys for being our guinea pigs for this month's TNC talk. This is being recorded. I did miss the first couple of minutes, but we will make Laura's slides available as well. So that if you wanted to go back and get that information for your own, for your own reasons, it will be available, and we'll put the video on our YouTube page. So if there's nothing else, I will let you all go. It is 8 o'clock, and it is, I don't know about the rest of you, but it's time for dinner.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you guys.